Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspect of running, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. This episode is sponsored by Janji. Janji is a local to Boston running apparel company dedicated to exploring, connecting, and giving back through running. Inspired by travel, informed by function, and built for adventure, Janji makes running essentials to equip you wherever you run or roam. The company was founded on the core belief that water is a human right and donates 2% of their sales to supporting clean water organizations around the world. I've known the two co-founders of Janji for over 5 years, and it's been a privilege to see them grow and increase the level at which they've been able to give back to the running community and to the world in general. This conversation with Matt Llano has two parts. We recorded a second follow-up, about 10-minute conversation to talk about the team he just joined. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back. I have Matt Llano joining me today on the podcast. Matt, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I've been looking forward to it for a while.
For sure. As I told you, I was hoping to do this one in Flagstaff with you, but obviously 2020 has had other plans for that, so I'm glad we were able to get on and chat.
Yeah, well, maybe there's always next time. So next time you're out here in Flag, we can set it up.
For sure. So before we go too far, first question for you: who is Matt?
Oh man, right from the beginning. That's a tough one. It depends on how long we have here. Wow. I think for a long time I've identified as a runner. But I'm also a dog dad. I'm a brother, a son, a boyfriend. Man, there's so many different things I could go into with that. A hard-hitting question.
Right from the jump.
Right from the beginning.
Well, I'm sure we'll dig into all of that, but since this is technically a running podcast, we'll start with the running side of things. So a question I like to ask is, hopefully it's not as hard-hitting, but do you remember your first run?
I don't think I remember like specifically the first time I ever like went out the door and ran. I think I grew up playing a bunch of different sports, and I played baseball and soccer and basketball, and I was a swimmer, and just all these different things. But I do kind of remember when I was in elementary school, the first kind of experience that I had with running for the sake of running and not for the sake of, conditioning for some kind of other sport. And it was an after school program that to be honest, I don't really even remember how I signed up for it, or if my parents signed me up for it, or I don't remember like what the origin was, but I do remember we would run after school on this grass field. And every lap that we did, I don't remember if each lap was the equivalent of a mile or if it was a half mile or a quarter mile. I also probably had no concept of distance at that time. But I remember that for whatever it was, every lap that we would do, we would get like a little charm kind of thing that we could put on our shoelaces, and it was like a little plastic foot. And they were all different colors. And I remember at the time it was like a very cool thing. Well, at least in my mind, maybe it wasn't very cool actually, but it was a cool thing. I think it was like kind of a badge of honor to see how many of these little things you could collect. And I would lace them into my shoelaces that day. And I would wear it to school, and that's kind of the first experience that I remember running. But that was a long time before I really got into like any kind of more serious training. That was literally, I probably would run, I don't even know, a half mile after school or something. It was certainly not by any means like training when I was, 8 years old or whatever I would have been. And then I do remember in high school, that was kind of when I got a little bit more serious about running and joined the track team. And I can remember like early seasons of running, but I don't remember any one in particular.
And So fast forward a few years, and you've run a 2:11 in Berlin. So there's obviously a quite a road ahead from those laps around the grass field. At what point did you realize that you liked it, you were good at it, that this was something that you might be better than your peers at?
Yeah, I think there was kind of a definitive moment that I can use to answer that question. That was my sophomore year in college. Well, so I'll backtrack for 1 second. In high school, coming out of high school, I had run well for where I lived. I lived in Maryland, and so I had run well for that area. But coming out of high school, my PRs were 4:25 for a mile, 9:44 for 2 miles, two flat 800, like nothing special. I think my best 5K was like in cross country was like 16 or something. So certainly by today's standards, absolutely like not top of the line. But I went on to run at a small Division I college, University of Richmond in Virginia, and I started running more than like 25 miles a week. And I did find that I was improving quickly with that. I think between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college, I probably jumped to like, I don't know, 60 miles a week, 65 miles a week, something like that, which for me at the time was a lot. I thinned out quite a bit that summer. And then just started like progressing really well. And it was my sophomore year in cross country, the first time that I made NCAAs as an individual. And I think that was the race. I still remember it. Regionals were at Wake Forest University, kind of a pretty bad day weather-wise. I remember there being standing water, 6 or 8 inches deep on a couple parts of the course, and just mud and people going down left and right. And for whatever reason, I had a good race that day. And so that's the first time that I kind of remember thinking, or like having a taste of a little bit more success, and thinking, okay, maybe this is something. I don't know if at the time I was really thinking about doing it professionally. I didn't really know even that was something that you could do. It was really before I followed running. I might have known who a few of like the really, really top name runners were, but it was before I was really that into it. And so I don't really know that I had a concept of running professionally and trying to make an Olympic team or trying to run a fast marathon or any of that kind of stuff. But it was the first time that I was kind of like, I could see myself doing this for a really long time, and just enjoying it and having it be part of my life really for as long as I can see. And so that was the first time that I was like, all right, I think I can ride this wave for a while and see just how good I can get.
And so how did you translate that from this could be something fun, I kind of want to do this for a long time, into a professional career within running?
Well, I remember, I think it was after that season, or maybe I had gone through the rest of that school year, after that one cross country season, my sophomore year. And I can remember over the summer, I sent my college coach, Steve Taylor, I sent him an email and I said, I really want to come. I lived about a 2-hour drive from Richmond is where my parents live. And so I went home for the summer, and I remember sending my coach an email and I said, I want to drive to campus and I want to meet up with you over the summer before school starts again. Which, not realizing like the ominous tone that I had kind of set with this email. And I should have said something to kind of set his mind at ease, because talking to him after the fact, he thought that I was going to be transferring. He thought that I was, going to drop a bomb on him. But in reality, what I wanted to do was to meet up with him and talk about all the different things that I could be doing as an individual, to try to be the best I could be. And I remember I wrote out this huge list of like, what it was like a checklist of things that I wanted to talk about. And I remember I had like, what kind of drills, what kind of strengthening, what kind of core, what should I be eating? How should I be sleeping? Should I get an altitude tent? Should I get like oxygen tanks? I had all these different things in my head that I was like, what can we do to try to really just maximize this and like boost my performance? And I remember meeting with him and he's like, we don't need to worry about all that stuff. Like that's all second to just being in a good training environment, having good, consistent training for the next couple of years. And it was a good reminder for me, I think, because I just started to get caught up in the ideas of like, what else can I be doing? What are all these other little 1%ers that I could try to add into the fold? And I wasn't really, not that I was neglecting the training, but I wasn't thinking of like keeping the main thing, keeping the focus on making these improvements in running, which I was still improving at the time so rapidly, just by the consistency of the miles and the positive team environment that we had, and all those kind of things. So I remember like trying to make this like the flip of a switch. I want to be as professional as I can be. But it was a good reminder from him that, this is still something that's supposed to be fun. This is still, we want you to improve, but not at the cost of enjoying it still and having you be part of the team atmosphere and the team culture. So that was a good reminder for me at the time when I started to get a little bit distracted by the shiny objects that sometimes we can be distracted by in the running world.
Do you still find yourself like reaffirming that or coming back to that lesson?
Oh, for sure. Definitely. In some ways, I think I've been training on my own for the majority of the last like 2.5 years,
and coaching yourself, right?
Yeah, coaching myself for a lot of that as well. Yeah, and I've realized, what I value in the sport, and I do find myself on a lot of runs, just thinking about like what I want from the sport, and why did I start running, and when I started running, it was that I wanted to be with my friends and I wanted to, be able to have something to do after school to, as like an outlet for my extra energy. And, and so I find myself now looking back on those times and wishing, I just was having a conversation the other day with someone and I said, there are a lot of things that I don't miss about college, but having the team environment where, I went to a small school. It was like, I think 3,000 undergraduate students at the time. And so it was about the same size as my high school. And so walking around campus, you kind of knew everyone and you had a small team where everyone was pretty close. And I find myself looking back on those days and thinking, man, those were, I think I did appreciate them at the time, but even more so now, I find myself appreciating those days and wishing that, that you had that team culture where your best friend lives in the apartment right next door to you. And, all your other friends you meet up with every day for lunch in the dining hall, and every day for practice. You just have to walk, a 10-minute walk to the place that you're going to do your stretches and your drills. And just kind of thinking back to those times. And I think it's a good reminder for me of why I got into the sport. And it's a good thing for me to think about when times have gotten really hard and when I've thought about walking away. And then there's something about like shifting back into that mindset of when I was in college and I was just thinking like, we didn't have scholarships at the University of Richmond. So you had to be 100% intrinsically motivated. And so there was no worry of contracts and of, winning prize money at some race or all that kind of stuff. And so it was just, I felt like it was a really pure love of the sport that was keeping you in it at the time. And And to be honest, like we lost a lot of people for that reason, because there was no kind of extra incentives. There wasn't scholarship money that was keeping people pursuing it. It was purely you had to love it. And so whenever times have gotten hard lately, I try to think about that. And I try to think, for 5 years in college, I never had a problem getting out the door for a run. It was always I just loved it. I just loved the feeling of getting out and running with a few close friends. So, I try to think about that a lot. Yeah.
So that was your why for college. And, so I'm curious, how has your why and your reason for running evolved, now post collegiately?
Oh, I think it's changed a lot. I think, there, but I think it also kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. I think there have been times where I've been so consumed in the process and so just in love with the process that it's not even been a thought. But then there are other times, when there's the stress of a contract negotiation or something like that, and it's easy to get caught up in that stuff. And I like to be part of the process, and so I have trouble just like handing something off to someone and just being like having complete faith that they're going to get it taken care of. And so I always want to be involved. And so I don't know if that maybe is to my own detriment, because I like to know what conversations are happening and I like to know all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's evolved over the years where when I've been healthy and I've been feeling good and running well, that's all I really think about. But when times have gotten tough, sometimes it can be hard to keep the focus on that process. And I think it's easy to get in this sport. I think it's really easy to be more focused on the outcome, which, we hear, especially lately, like people are talking about this a lot where, outcome oriented versus process oriented and the pros and cons of each. And I think for sure I've been distracted by more outcome oriented goals, especially lately. And frankly, like being unsponsored for 2 years, and you think, what do I have to do to get back to the level where it's sustainable for me to keep pursuing this? And it does get frustrating at times to see, people that you're running faster than be fully sponsored and you're kind of a sitting duck without anything. But I'm just trying to stay steadfast in the pursuit and trying to really get back to enjoying the process, because I think I've lost that to some extent. And so I'm working on some things now. I know I had kind of alluded in a text message to you a couple weeks ago that I was hoping to have some news to be able to share, and I don't yet. But there are some things.
Cliffhanger.
I know. I gotta give people a reason to like come back, right?
Yeah.
Gotta have a reason to be back on the podcast. So no, there's no news yet. But I am hopeful, and I'm working on some stuff to hopefully be able to share soon. And all of that to say, like, I think this is a good time. This pandemic is a good time to be trying to refocus and reevaluate and like you said, figure out my why. Because I think it's easy to lose sight of that when it's not like really defined. And that's maybe what the last couple months have kind of shown me, is that my why lately hasn't been super defined. And so I'm working on trying to figure that out, but I just don't have all the answers right now.
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating to be able to have this conversation with athletes at your level, where some of them feel like they have it totally figured out and others don't. And there's everything in between. And the reason that so my guest list on this podcast initially was 100% professional athletes, and it evolved to amateurs and sub-elites and whatnot. But the reason that I love having at least a majority of professional athletes is because there are these consistencies that come up with what it takes to get to your level. It's not just enough to love it. It's not just enough to be consistent. There are intangibles that you can't necessarily, maybe you can train yourself to do them. You probably can, actually. So I'll correct myself there. And I guess that's the point. The point is, whatever it is, you guys have something that most don't. And the takeaway is what an amateur can learn from you. And in this instance, one of the many, I think, is that everybody's a work in progress, right? It's not, you've run a very fast marathon and many other fast marathons, faster than most people, period, and faster than many people can run a half marathon. And so there are pieces of that you have to have fundamental skills to get there. And then there's the other piece where it's still a work in progress and you've got a lot to learn. And I think it's helpful to hear that type of balance for somebody like myself or many of the people listening, that even if you don't have the why figured out, that's okay too.
Yeah, I think as long as there's kind of an awareness and like you said, I think there are a lot of people at our level that that don't have it figured out necessarily, and some people can kind of coast for a while without really knowing the why and everything about the process. But I think at some point, a lot of people will probably face a point in their career when they're forced to really examine that and try and figure it out. And I think it's okay not to have all the answers. And that's kind of where I am right now. And I have some ideas of things and things that are part of my why that I haven't had for the last couple of years. And I think that that's part of why I've been struggling lately. And so, but it's like, it's taken this period of lacking, if you want to say that, it's taken this period of lacking for me to realize some of that stuff. So I think to think that any one person has it all figured out is, I think, is a flawed way of thinking, because we're all part of the human experience where we're just living our day to day, and we're trying to just trying to get by. And I think a lot of people think, especially in this age of social media highlight reels, like we think that everyone else has it all figured out. And you get to know someone a little bit better. You get to know someone past the facade of their social media presence, and you know that that's not the case. And so I think having these real conversations is underrated, and I think I would love it if it happened more often. But people don't want to get into the nitty gritty a lot of the time.
Totally. And I agree with that. I think that this pandemic has forced nobody has small talk anymore, and it's all either nothing or, as I call it, big talk. And I think it's trending in that direction. And at least the trend that I see on social is that it's not a highlight reel. I mean, one of the reasons that I enjoy following you is because you keep it real. And there are a lot of athletes that have started to do the same. And I think that that's how it needs to be. I have a friend, Amelia Boone, who's been on the podcast 2 times. And those are some of the most popular episodes. And her story is, for 4 or 5 years, she was winning every single race in the Spartan world. And she was a multiple time world champion and this and that. And on the outside, it looked like life was good. Life was great. But that's when she was struggling the most. And now when she's not winning all the time, but instead connecting and working on herself and being a part of other people's journeys, like she's in a place that she never could have even imagined. And it's totally unrelated to race results. And I think that when she starts racing again, she's going to have better performances and more enjoyable performances, more importantly, than ever before. And it's been fascinating to see this story play out over and over and over again, where once you start having fun, and I'm not saying you're not having fun, I'm just saying in general, once the fun starts to be a part of the equation, that's when breakthroughs I think can happen. I mean, I tried for 4 years to run a sub 3 marathon, and it didn't happen until I stood on the start line. And I've shared this story like a million times on this podcast by now. So I'm sure people are like, yep, this guy again, but it's my podcast. So it took standing on the starting line, not caring about what number showed up on the clock for me to actually achieve the original goal. And it was just the most incredible feeling. But it was the same thing. It was like, is this ever going to happen? Like, is this just a goal that I will never get? And it took a total reframing of what's important in order to actually achieve what was initially the original goal, and then eventually, like not the backup goal, but the tangible goal versus the intangible.
Yeah. No, I think I love that story. And I think it's so relatable to so many people because, like I was just saying, we get so focused on what time we want to run. And we forget, like I was saying, this is why I'm trying to think so much of why I started running, especially lately. And I can say, you kind of jokingly said it, but I can say that lately I've kind of lost the fun in running. And so that's one of the things I'm trying to get back and trying not to think so much about my initial goal, which was running under 210. And I still think that I'm capable of that, but I'm trying to take the focus off of that and the weight off of that number and just more figuring out what I want as a runner and deeper than that, like what I want as a person. And I think, again, like you spoke to this in Amelia's case, like I was so focused on these outcome oriented goals for so long. And I've kind of started to realize that it's not really about, for me, it's not really about that. It's about the connectedness that running has given me for so many years. And losing sight of that these last couple of years being on my own has made me crave it that much more. And so that's kind of where I find myself right now. I'm trying to figure out how to be part of that again in an environment if that's available, or if I can create something on my own. And so that's where I find myself right now. But I love like just hearing people talk about it's not always about the time or the goal, but it's like the community that running has given us. And when so many of us think about why we started running, that's probably at the core of a lot of people's answers. When, and a lot of cross country runners in high school, it's like this joke that I think has been perpetuated for years and years, but it's like, we get cut from other sports and then we go run cross country. And it's like, just because we didn't have any other option. And
no ball skills or puck handling skills.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's like maybe a lot of people's kind of foray into running, but the reason that we stick with it is so often that we do find our communities there, and we do find the connection that we maybe didn't even know we were craving. And so that's what I've realized is part of my why. And so that's what I'm trying to find again. And I just love, hearing one of my favorite quotes that kind of speaks to what you said with Amelia. And from the outside, it looks like everyone, or it looks like some people have it all put together and have, all this stuff going for them. But one of my favorite things to come back to is that everyone's fighting a battle that you may know nothing about. And that's kind of been the case for me through some stuff, and certainly for a number of other people where everything looks great. And before the race, someone will say in an interview, "Oh, I'm great. Training's been amazing. Best of my life." And then afterwards it's, "Oh, well, I had this going into the race and I had that. And
my foot's broken."
Yeah. I've been running on a torn labrum and, all these things. And so I just think to open up like more space in our hearts to have that compassion for other people. And, we tend to judge people by their latest result in this sport. And I just don't think it's as black and white as that. And like you said, I do think we're starting to have a shift where we're starting to see more realness. I think there's still like a little bit of a penchant towards like that perfectionism and highlight reels, but I do agree with you that we're starting to see the realness a little bit more. So I'm hopeful that that's a trend that's going to continue, and maybe something good that'll come out of 2020.
Me too. Thanks again to Janji for sponsoring the podcast. I've enjoyed seeing Janji grow over the years, and their gear has only gotten better as time has gone on. I have a few pairs of both the AFO split and AFO middle shorts and highly recommend them. Their singlets are super cool too. You can take 15% off all month with the code FTLR15. I hope you love them as much as I do. And now back to our conversation. Question for you. So you mentioned adding joy and finding joy again. For somebody who might be struggling with enjoying running in 2020 or just in general, what would you tell them?
Well, my pre-pandemic answer would have been like, find a group of people to run with, a group of friends that you can get out the door.
Maybe don't do that now.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the best advice now. No, I that is still somewhat true. I mean, I think as long as you're doing it in a safe way and in smaller groups, I think it's still something you can try to change, because that is, I find myself so much of the time, probably 98% of the runs that I've done the last 2.5 years have been just completely on my own. But I think where I find myself forgetting about looking at my watch and forgetting about how many miles I still have to go, those are the days that I'm running with someone. And those are the days that I'm just immersed in a conversation about whatever. And so it's that connectedness that I'm trying to get back to, and I'm trying to find that, and trying to figure out, like, in today's pandemic reality, trying to figure out how to safely do that. And so, yeah, that's been a goal. And I think it's hard to say to just like throw, I don't want to say throw goals out the window, because I don't think that's the answer, but I think trying to think of more kind of process oriented goals instead of outcome oriented goals. And that sounds very easy to do, but it's something I think it's really challenging. And I think that's something that I've been struggling with, is how to fall in love with the process again, and how to frame my goals as like, what can I do on a daily basis? What can I do in the next 3 months to get better, to be a better runner, human, friend, companion, all those things, instead of just thinking, what do I need to do to run 2:10? And I think if I can make that shift, I think that's where you start to see more progress, and you can start to enjoy the process again. And I think, like you said, I think those are those times when we can really embrace that side of it, and we can stand on the starting line and we can say, you know what, whatever today hands me is what it's going to be, and I'm going to have fun with it. And I think those, like you said, I think those are the times that we do have the breakthroughs. And I think I can look back in my career and see that maybe at the time I didn't realize it, but around certain races, there were things in my life that might have been happening that just made me happier overall. And those were the times that I had the really big breakthroughs. And so taking some time to reflect on that and think about like some of those outside circumstances, where otherwise you might have been like, oh, my training hasn't been that spectacular, but I have these other things going for me. And then you have this big breakthrough race and you're like scratching your head, because you're like, on paper, this doesn't make sense. Like my training really hasn't been like, there have been 5 times in my career that it's been way better, objectively. And it didn't come together for one reason or another. And then now I feel like I'm undertrained, and I feel like I'm, waiting for stuff to start clicking again. And then those are when you have the breakthroughs. And it doesn't make any sense sometimes, but I think we just have to embrace those times and realize that it's all about just our whole like life balance instead of, I think when things get a little bit out of balance, especially when you're trying to do this as a career, it's really easy for that scale to shift and things get out of balance. And that can be, sometimes it can still keep coming together, but I think it can present more challenges at times too. So that's something that I've learned, I don't know, just through the ups and downs of my own running career.
Definitely. Something you said reminds me of the name of Jacob Pusey's podcast. It's called the Art and Science of Running podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, this objectively, my training is better or has been better 5 different times and this and that. And, I've had the same thing a couple of times where like, my training was 3:05 and I ran a 4:01, stuff like that. And it's just a reminder that there's the science side of it, and then there's the art side of it, where you alluded to, like, when your headspace is right, that's when you can execute. And I think it's a nice reminder that, like, that there is the calculated aspect of it. Like, this is what your potential might be, but then there's the understanding that the brain has so much power. And if you sharpen that muscle, you can get more out of your legs and your heart and things like that by doing that kind of work as well. So a question I have along those lines is if gratitude is a part of something you intentionally practice or not.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. For the longest time, it wasn't. And in the last, probably in the last 2 years, just in going through this journey on my own again and figuring out what I want from the sport and the role that I want to play in the sport, I've had to make some changes, and I've had to look within, and I've had to think about a lot of different things. And one that keeps persistently coming up is mindfulness and gratitude. And I actually I was a psychology major in college, and I took a class on mindfulness and gratitude. And this was kind of before it was more mainstream, as I would say. It's kind of been the last couple of years. And it's been something that I've been trying to be a lot more aware of. And I have a journal now that I keep in my bedside table that it's a gratitude journal where I try and write every day, try and write 3 things that I'm grateful for. And I'm not perfect with it. I will say there are long stretches of time that I forget to write in it, or that I don't dedicate and set aside a time to do it. But I find that when I really look for those things every day, it's amazing. When you look for it, you find them.
Right.
and there are these times that I can be going along and I can be thinking like, man, nothing's going right. Like, what do I have to do? And you just realize, like, it's so easy to overlook these little moments of every day that really can make a huge impact. And so I think setting aside that time and realizing how much of an impact that gratitude can have is like, that's how you're going to make the change, when you really understand the difference it can make. And so a lot of my last 2 years, I've just been adding books to my bookshelf on mindfulness and the power of the mind. And the brain always keeps a score is one that's on my list right now. And
I love that.
yeah, and there's a fantastic podcast that I'm forgetting the name of the podcast actually, but it was the guest who was on the podcast that it's incredible. Her name is Marissa Peer. And she was a psychologist, and now she does a lot of stuff on the power of the mind and how, like, what we focus on grows, and how the ways that we think are really affecting our health and our well-being. And I came across it maybe like a year ago when I was mowing my lawn, and it just blew me away. And so every couple weeks or a couple months, I come back and I listen to that podcast, and highly recommend it for anyone out there who's into or who even has an openness to the power of the mind. And again, her name is Marissa Peer, and she's just phenomenal. And so she really kind of changed my perspective and made me realize that what we're thinking about, what we give our attention to, is what grows. And so I think there was a while that I was giving attention to stuff that wasn't feeding my soul and wasn't pushing me forward and wasn't making me a better person, better runner. And so I've tried to shift a lot of that stuff, and certainly gratitude has been a big part of that.
That's awesome. I love that line. What we focus on grows. I read a book called Mind Gym, and
I just read that one.
It's a little like it feels like a pocket book, or like something you should keep in your back pocket. It's a very odd book. But one of the takeaways from it was along the same lines. It was essentially it was talking about how to focus within a race, and you can only think about one thing at a time. So you better make it a positive thought, so you can push the negative out.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's I have a coaching business that I started a couple months ago, and I'm always telling my athletes the same thing. I'm like, if we're thinking about how many miles we still have to run, and how much our legs are hurting, and how so-and-so is beating you by however many seconds or whatever, and you're struggling to hang on to them, those are the thoughts that are going to be amplified, and it's only going to get harder from there. And we have to shift that way of thinking to how far we've already come, how much distance we've already covered, the obstacles we've overcome to even be on the starting line that day, that kind of stuff. And it's really hard. It's not an easy shift to make. But I think with practice, you can get better at it. And I remember in Berlin this past fall, when I ran a new PB by a minute and a half, like, I remember thinking in the race, there were a few times that I think I kind of defaulted and thought, oh, this is getting a little bit hard. I need to make a shift here. But I had kind of prepared before the race with a mantra. And I said, the mantra for Berlin for me in 2019 was, you're better than you've ever been. And so I just kept repeating that in my head. And that was the only thing that I was trying to think about. So anytime I was having a rough mile, or I started feeling sorry for myself, I thought, you're better than you've ever been. Like, right now is the best you've ever been. You've never had more experience. You've never, had more miles accumulated. You've never had all this hard work like in your back pocket. And so I kept thinking about those things when it got really hard. And that's what kind of carried me through those moments, and then ultimately led to a new personal best. So I think that's hugely valuable, and just trying to give yourself little tools for reframing the negative thoughts, and practicing what you're going to do when those creep in, because they're going to creep in. They're going to come at some point. No one is 100% positive all the time, in any circumstance, I would say. And so being prepared with those tools in your tool belt is how you're really going to be able to draw the most out of yourself on race day, or in a workout, or whatever it might be, whatever goal you're trying to tackle.
Definitely. One of the things you mentioned there was the obstacles we've overcome. For me, it was after Boston 2017, I spent basically the next 18 months injured, and then coming out of that, I just had this newfound appreciation for health and being able to run and enjoying it. And that was what that was the click for me, that it was, I don't have to do this. I get to do this. And,
yes.
I talked to Shalane before that race, and she said, I feel most alive when I'm racing because of the unknown. And we get to choose that kind of discomfort, and we get to choose that kind of uncertainty. And like her words were, "That's when I come alive." And like I can't resonate with anything more. It's like I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's like it's such a privilege to be in that position where you're hurting, but you're flying, and you're feeling good, but you're feeling bad, and you just don't know what's next, and you can't get there without putting in the work.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love Shalane and everything about her, and just the messages that she emanates, and the Shalane effect. And I just can't speak highly enough of her as a runner, but also as a person. And yeah, I think that's one of the takeaways. Actually, I forget where I first heard her say it, probably on a podcast somewhere, maybe on yours, I don't remember, but where she talked about that shift of, I don't have to do this. I get to do this.
Right.
I get to go out for another run today. My body has gifted me with health and with the ability to run, 120 miles a week, chasing after these goals that I've set for myself, and chasing after these opportunities to show that I'm one of the best in the world. And that's just a really special thing. And I think so many people kind of coast through their life without really experiencing something like that. And so I think as runners, we have this opportunity where we get to go for these runs, and we get to push ourselves, and we get to dig deep and see how much hurt we can handle. And that's really like something to be proud of, and something to appreciate, because there are a lot of people who can't do that for so many different reasons, or who just don't, who haven't found something that gives them that feeling. And so I'm grateful to have found that when I was younger, and to have embraced it for all these years. And it's certainly part of what I'm trying to regain right now.
For sure. And I found that the easiest way to find that is take a break. And the easiest way to find it while taking a break is to have a break forced on you.
Yeah, it's true.
You don't get to choose that break.
No, and you never want it to have to come to that. But similar to you, I mean, I went through a similar thing with injury, where I don't think I'd ever taken off more than, a week, maybe, in my life for an injury, and maybe even just a couple days for an injury. It was always like at the end of a season, we would give ourselves a few days or a week or two at most, just not to have to think about running and whatnot. But from an injury perspective, I never had to take off more than a couple days. And then in 2016 kind of changed all that for me. 2016 and 2017, where I ran the Olympic trials in 2016. I was sixth, like had this, I would say a good day, but it was hurt kind of that whole buildup from the previous July 2015, and just managed it, and just was like, get through this race. You can do great things here. You're still able to run. You can manage it. And then after the trials, I didn't run for 4 months, and had some surgery done to fix some stuff in my pelvis, and then had another great training segment, ran New York City Marathon, tore my labrum, didn't run for another 6 months. So it was this period of like from going from never having been injured to, 10 months within the span of a year, of zero running. And that really challenged my perspective. And like you said, similar to how you had this epiphany of like, I get to do this, and it was forced on you after an injury. That's kind of something that I realized in 2016 and 2017. Similarly, was like, man, this is not, I can't take this for granted anymore. This is something that is a privilege to do. And especially to try to do it as a career and a passion, and, to have a community of people that supports you doing that. So that was a big shift for me as well. And like you said, you never want it to have to be forced on you, but sometimes like you just keep pushing until something says, you know what, you need to stop, take a step back. And in this case, for me, like it was for you, it took an injury for me to really take a step back and realize that.
What was that first run back after the second round of rest?
Oh, it was I still remember I did it at the Northern Arizona University track, and I still have a very clear image in my head of like, I can remember, I think I might have even posted a picture on my Instagram a couple years ago about it. And I was all bundled up, and it was in, I think like April or something of 2017. And I just remember hurting. I was hurting so much, but I was also like, man, I honestly didn't know
Loving it.
yeah, but at the same time loving it. Yeah. Because I didn't know if I would run again. I really didn't. It was just such an up and down couple years where coming off the high of running a personal best in Berlin and then running well at the trials, but also then having the disappointment of not making the team, and then going through this cycle of injuries and just realizing like, man, there is hope yet for me to put one foot in front of the other, and to still run. And even at that time, I was thinking I might not ever get back to the level of running that I was before, but if I can just run, I'll be happy. I'll be grateful. And so, I remember thinking that at the time, and I think I ran like 10 by 1 minute, with like a several minute walk break. And it was really humbling. And it was, again, like I said, it was painful, but it was also like a blissful moment where I realized like there is still hope for me to run again. And it just gave me that much deeper of a sense of appreciation of what running means to me. So again, it took going through all that injury for me to really take a step back and realize it. But in some ways, I'm grateful for it. In other ways, I could have passed on all those injuries, and I could have said in my mind, I'm like, I would have figured it out, like not having to go through all that. But
do you think you would have though?
I don't know. That's what I was just going to say. Who knows? Maybe I wouldn't have. I think eventually, I'm not going to say like it's part of my story, right? I'm not going to say like there are things that I wish did or didn't happen. I think we always have little things that we picture having gone differently in our heads, and we replay that story of like the what ifs. But I think now I'm kind of at the point in my life where I'm realizing that all of that stuff brought me to where I am. And so, I have to figure out a way to be grateful for it. I have to figure out a way to embrace it as part of my story, and not to try to shun it, and not to try to stuff it down and run away from it like I have with a lot of stuff. So it's been good, I think, to confront it and to, again, like I said, just to embrace it as part of my story.
That's awesome. Speaking of your story, let's fast forward at 10 years. What are you going to be really proud of?
This is something I've thought about recently, actually. Again, and just in what I was saying before about trying to figure out what I want to get out of the sport and what role I want to have in the sport. I want to be proud of like the interactions that I have with people. I want to be proud of the way that I make people feel when I'm with them, and that I try to look past what someone has accomplished, and try to figure out like how I can connect with them as a person rather than as someone who's run whatever performance. And I think, there are times I've been better at that than others. But I've realized it's something that's really important to me, especially as I've started to get into a role as a coach, with the people that I coach. It's not, I tell them all the time, and whether they believe it or not, I don't know yet. But I tell them all the time, I've had people come to me after a race that maybe didn't go the way that we thought it could, or the way that we wanted it to. And they're like, oh man, I'm so sorry to disappoint you. And I'm like, hold up here. Like, that's not the point of this.
Right.
You're not disappointing me at all. Like there's no performance you can run that's going to disappoint me ever, because you're doing something that you're trying to pursue your best. The name of my business is Find Your Fast. So you're trying to find your fast, whatever that means to you. And there is no shame in failing in that process. And so that's something also actually that I learned from Shalane and embraced from her, is like, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. You're gonna fail, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think there was a lot of time in my career that I was afraid to talk about my ambitions or my goals, and because I was afraid of letting people down. I was afraid of people judging me for what I wanted to accomplish. And I reached a point, and again, it's still a work in progress, but I think I've reached a point where I'm like, that stuff doesn't matter. The other people's perceptions of you that's on them, not on you. And so I think I've reached a point where I'm a little bit less afraid to fail to a certain extent. But again, it's still something I'm working on, but I think it's a lesson that people can learn something from, where, there's no shame in pursuing something and falling short of it because you're out there trying. And I love that. I love when I just see people like giving their best towards something. It's such a worthy pursuit, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that too. I didn't realize that quote was from Shalane. So I ran a couple marathons in 2015, and I put one of her quotes. I wrote it in Sharpie on my arm,
Mm-hmm.
and it was something along the lines of, put it all out there, share the journey, and you'll be better for it on the other side. I'm butchering the actual quote, but the point is share the risk you're taking and bring other people along for the ride. And that's sort of been like my ethos and like how I try and live my life. And the doing it within a race is like a microcosm of like how I try and live, because I think that's the way to do it. To take risks, bring other people along for the ride, and see what happens.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good reminder that it is, for so many of us, it's about so much more than the performance. And that just speaks exactly to that. I do a really similar thing in all of my marathons. I write on my water bottles, like in professional marathoning. I'm sure you're aware of this, but maybe some listeners aren't. But in professional marathoning, a lot of the top athletes every 3 miles can get personal fluid bottles. They can fill with whatever they want, and they can put it on a table, and it's there for us and given to us every 3 miles in a marathon. So on all of my water bottles, I write either quotes or a combination, usually, of quotes that I really love and that motivate me, as well as people in my life that that I'm running for that day. And Shalane and my Berlin Marathon in 2019, where I just ran 2:11 about a year ago, Shalane was on one of my bottles. And so I wrote her name, and I did kind of draw strength from that. And I thought back to a couple of her New York City marathon performances. And I would get these boosts of energy in the middle of the race or late in the race, even, because just thinking back to what she's done with and for the running community just really motivated me and gave me like an extra boost when I maybe started feeling sorry for myself and was wishing the race was over. So yeah, that's just another piece of that, like, it speaks again to that connectedness that we all have in this sport, and that I think drives so many of us, whether we realize it or not.
Definitely. Switching gears a little bit, one of the questions that we received when we posted about this podcast was about your career trajectory related to coming out. And the question was, are there any notable differences in your pro career before and after?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a little bit of background about that. In 2013 in December, I remember I was about to go run the club cross country championships in Bend, Oregon. And I wrote a blog post basically coming out. And I remember I posted the blog, and I was petrified of what the response would be, that I turned off my phone for the rest of the day. I drove to Phoenix. I got on the flight, flew to Bend. And I didn't turn my phone on even until the next day, because I was just so terrified of what the responses would be. and I think that weekend I felt that there was this big weight off my shoulders, and but you didn't really see it in the performance that much. But I think that did start to carry into my training. It started to bleed into my life. This was one of those moments, actually, to kind of full circle back to what we talked about earlier. This was one of those moments I said where, there were things outside of running in my life that were coming together, that were going well, that I think contributed to having really good performances. And this was one of them, because I think about a month after I put that post up, I went and ran the US Half Marathon Championships at the Houston Half Marathon. Had a huge breakthrough race, like 2-minute personal best, made the world team that year, just blew away the expectations I had of myself, the expectations that my coach had of me at the time, and really just like put me on another level. And so I think there was a big shift there where I just started to really, again, it's one of those things, like, I don't have it all figured out. I'm not perfect. It's still something that I struggle with, but I think having these moments in time where I've been kinder to myself and where I've embraced more of myself, versus, like I said, I have a tendency to kind of shove stuff away and push stuff down. That was one of those times that I was really just happy. And I felt like there was this other side of me that I could share with people around me. And I was getting so many messages at the time through social media and all that. It's like one of the good things I think social media can be used for. I was getting so many positive, encouraging messages of people just sharing in my experience and sharing their stories with me. And again, this is like coming back to what, like, one of the marks that I want to leave on the sport is hopefully making it a more accepting place than maybe it was before, or maybe than my perception was that it was before. And, I think, speaking to like before I came out, when I was in college, generally my experience was very positive. And I think, looking back on it, there wasn't a lot that I would change, but there were a few experiences that I had where, I would find out that some teammates, were, maybe not as accepting, and, had pictures of me on their wall that they would throw darts at, and just, certain stories like this that you hear that it's like, it almost sounds made up. But it really, like, that cut to my core, because I pride myself on being like a people person. And I try to like give the best of myself when I'm with someone. And so, for some people to kind of turn that around and think of you in a different way, or to think less of you because of this one part of your personality, or part of who you are, was really hard. And I think that comes back at times. I think we've made a ton of progress in the United States and on the world stage as well, with gay rights and acceptance and social change. But I think we still have a long way to go. There's still times that I find myself, I'm walking down the street with my boyfriend. I find myself pulling my hand away because I'm afraid of someone, judging us, or afraid of what someone might say. And so, like I said, it's still a work in progress. But I think, career-wise, I think, it's something that I'm less afraid of in the running community. But it's still there. I mean, you still wonder sometimes. And it's, little things kind of pop up for me, but a couple of years ago, made some coaching changes and started coaching myself for a while. And I remember, someone sent me a link to, I try to never, one of my pieces of advice for anyone listening, don't ever read Let's Run, message boards. They're horrendous.
Fair point.
But someone sent me a link to something. And so of course I was going to open it and start looking at it. My name was on it. And it was just like the scum of comments that you could possibly imagine of someone having come out. And and it was all there. And, that's the running community. That's part of the running community. And I don't think it's reflective of the majority of the running community, but it is reflective of a subset of people. And so it does give you just a little perspective, like we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a long way to go. And so that's something that I still hope to make a change with, and something that I try to embrace at times. And I actually recently was having a conversation with someone where I said I want to lean into it more. But I think there's this fear that, posting about it on social media, I tend to have a dip in followers. I get unfollowed by masses of people if I post a picture of myself and my boyfriend together. And it's sad to think about that. But it does happen. So I'm trying to lean into that more and put less weight into some of the negatives of that, and instead focus on like the positive contribution that it can be. But it's hard at times to embrace it. So it's something that I'm working on.
Definitely. I think that's a good place to wrap with your reflection on making progress, but still having plenty of work to do ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of the I think like the theme of 2020 that a lot of us are finding out is this,
right.
We've made progress, but we're obviously not there yet. And there's still a lot of things that can be improved. So as long as we're all willing to put in the work, I think we can make these changes. It takes commitment and a long-term view. So if we stick with it, I think we'll get there.
Absolutely. Well, where can we follow along with your adventures and your journey?
Mostly, I guess, on social media, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. I am most active on Instagram, just at Matt Llano. I also have Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff, but I don't really use much of it other than Instagram right now. And hopefully I'll have some news to share. So I'm trying to get back to being a little bit more active on those social channels, but just haven't felt like I've had much to share recently. So hopefully that'll change, and you'll start seeing a little bit more of me.
As promised, I have Matt joining again for a little update since we last spoke. As he alluded to in our initial conversation, he has since joined a team, a professional running team. So Matt, first, welcome back. Thanks for chatting again. And excited to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me back on. I'm glad that this worked out and we kind of have another chance to connect. Now that the word is out, I don't have to be as tight-lipped as I was last time. But yeah, I'm really excited to announce that I've joined Dark Sky Distance, and sponsored by Under Armour now, and still based in Flagstaff. But yeah, a lot to be excited about, and I'm excited to kind of chat with you about it a little bit today.
Yeah. So why Dark Sky?
Well, as I was over the last couple of years, I've been kind of trying to figure out what I really wanted in a group. I've been on my own for 2.5 years now, I think, something like that. It just decided that the group I was with previously wasn't quite ideal for me anymore, where I am in my life and my career now. And so just started to try to figure out what I really wanted in a group and in a coach and in a company to work with, in a sponsor to work with. So had been kind of tossing around some ideas with my agent, Stephen Haas, for a while. And I kind of kept coming back to this idea of Under Armour in my head, and brought it up to him at one point. And he's like, you know what? I think this actually could be a really good fit. They're a Maryland-based company based in Baltimore. It's actually kind of a cool full circle moment, because Under Armour was the first company that I talked to when a couple years after I went pro, once I was kind of starting to reach the level of maybe thinking about a sponsorship. And so I went, I did if you want to call it an official visit, with Under Armour back in 2014, went to their campus, met with sports marketing, met with the shoe development team, and really liked the stuff that they were doing at the time, but then was part of a group. And so decided to forego an individual deal in order to stay with the group I was with. So it didn't work out at the time, but it's fun now to be reconnecting with Jamie, who's the same sports marketing person that I met with back in 2014. And just sort of kind of restarting that conversation. But I just love everything that they're about. They're giving all these great resources to the athletes. I've already been on a couple of calls to try and figure out some of the health issues that I've had the last couple of years, and so that's exciting. And I really like that they're supportive of the gay community, and they have a whole United We Win campaign that I'm really excited to be part of moving forward. And Dark Sky, being based right here in Flagstaff, just kind of was ideal timing when they announced. We'd been talking about it, just on some runs throughout town for a couple months before they announced, and I just kind of could feel the excitement building. I could feel the energy kind of growing around the group, and to start to see now that they're having these great performances come together. Particularly for me, I'm excited about the marathoner that we have in the group, the other marathoner, Stephen Scullion, who's an Irish. He's made the Irish Olympic team now. So he hasn't competed in Tokyo, obviously, but he's run 2:09 and 61 low for the half marathon. So I'm super excited to have him as a training partner. And yeah, there were a lot of different kind of moving parts that made this decision kind of an easy one for me.
That's awesome. It's so cool that it ended up being, the one right in your backyard. Were you looking for teams outside of Flagstaff, or were you pretty set on staying in Flagstaff?
Yeah, I was pretty open. For a time, I was considering leaving Flagstaff, moving somewhere else, just to kind of get a fresh start. And, I was considering being based at sea level instead of altitude, just because of the asthma issues that I've had. And I've kind of wondered if some of that was related to living at high altitude for 8.5 years, and having formed these dysfunctional breathing patterns. And there's a lot of stuff that I could go into, but all of that aside, I was thinking about leaving Flagstaff, and was looking into some options. And when this opportunity presented itself, it made so much sense to me. And it was, I wasn't having to uproot my whole life and sell my house and, move my dogs and the whole thing. And so yeah, it made a lot of sense. And then I was really excited about the possibility too of working with this brand and with this group of people. And so I think it just all the pieces kind of started falling together in the right way at the right time.
That's super cool. One of the things you mentioned was their intentional approach to diversity and support of gay pride and more than just great running. So what does that mean to you?
Oh, it's huge. I had a phone call with some of the sports marketing crew a couple weeks ago, and I still just distinctly remember one of the things that they said to me was like, you can be, obviously performances matter, but the times that you've run on paper and the places you've achieved at certain races are part of the picture. But they said more than that, we want to work with people who have stories to tell. We want to work with people who are just good people in general too. And so I was excited, and that kind of was a foray for me into bringing up the Pride campaign that they have. And they're super excited, I think, to have me on board for that. And we've already kind of started discussing potential collaborations for 2021 and future as well. So it's exciting for me to be part of something that's bigger than myself. And it's especially now that I've gotten older and I can kind of appreciate a little bit more things outside of just my own world of my own races, and start to realize how big of an impact I can have on people. And I did a Runners Alliance initiative kind of webinar a couple weeks ago with Runners World, and I was really moved by that. At one point, one of the other people on the call said that when I came out in 2013, it was a really powerful moment for them, and it actually inspired them to come out, and it made them feel really comfortable just knowing that they weren't alone, knowing that they weren't the only other professional runner who was dealing with similar things. And so that really struck a chord with me, and it made me just want to tell my story more. And not that I've been shy about telling it, but it's kind of more just something that I've talked about if people have asked. And so now I'm excited to be paired with a company that's excited to help me tell that story and to help just spread this message of inclusion and positivity in this community. So I'm really grateful the way that things have worked out, and how, like I said before, just how everything's kind of come full circle.
That's super cool. So along similar lines, you talked about what you want to sort of bring to Under Armour and the running world. What do you want to bring to Dark Sky?
Oh man, it's I think being the position that I'm in, I've been in Flagstaff for 8.5 years now. I think I've lived here. I don't know exactly when Stephen Haas moved here. He's my agent, but also one of the coaches of the group, along with Shayla Houlihan. And one of the things I want to bring is just my experiences in Flagstaff, the depth of knowledge that I have of my own, how I train here, how I can kind of give some guidance to the younger athletes on the team. I think I'll be the oldest athlete on the team now. So, which is a new thing for me, but I enjoy being in that position. I enjoy being able to kind of take other people under my wing and share my experiences with them. So I think I bring a lot of knowledge about just Flagstaff and training at altitude, and what's worked for me as far as going down to sea level and doing sea level training camps and going to race at sea level and just all these different components. So I'm excited to bring that wealth of knowledge. I'm excited to kind of add to our road roster of athletes. Previously, really the only one who was doing much on the roads that I can think of off the top of my head is Stephen Scullion. So, we're starting with the addition of me now, we're starting to maybe draw a little bit more road focus as well as track, so maybe a little bit more balance there. And I think we can start to attract now the type of athlete who maybe coming out of college, you can tell is more suited towards the roads than maybe having a full, 10-year career on the track or something. So I think it just brings some balance there. And I hope to be a leader too. I hope to use all of my experience of the last 10, 11 years or however long I've been doing this now professionally, 9, 10 years, bringing all of that experience into the group and hopefully having, a lot to share with them.
Super cool. On the Flagstaff experience side of things, is there potential for your pizza related experience as it pertains to Dark Sky?
Yeah. I actually forgot about that connection. So
at first, that's what I thought. I thought it was a sponsored team from a restaurant originally.
No, that's a good point though. I think that's just a coincidence. But yeah, that's to give context to everyone listening. Was that the first time we met in person? I think it might have been.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jonathan and I met in person at an event through Inside Tracker at a brewery in Flagstaff called Dark Sky Brewing Company. Kind of a funny connection. And I do think that they serve the best pizza in Flagstaff, which is Pizzicoletta Pizza. But yeah, no connection at the moment. I don't know if there's a potential collaboration there in the future, but that would be pretty sweet.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's huge potential there. Well, Matt, thanks so much for elaborating a little bit on the exciting development here, and we will all be rooting for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate the follow-up.
Of course. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next week on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you've enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too.